Well, with a new president in the White House, you're probably wondering how that should affect your financial decisions. Well, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. And welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host Sarah Samuels. And today, we're going to be talking about our new presidential administration and what it means for your hard-earned retirement savings.
Dave, it's great to be here with you and, of course, with all of our listeners. But first, I have to ask, for our listeners, Dave has this, he has a Band-Aid on his face. I know you were just at the Mecum car auctions, Dave. Did you fall and maybe bump your head on one of the fenders there?
Well, I before I'd gone to the auction, we were there with a bunch of our advisors,
right? Yes.
Financial advisors, and I said to one of them, I said, look, if I even start talking about, buying a car at this auction, you have permission to punch me square in the temple.
Oh, okay.
I forgot I said that.
Oh, so I see what happened. You started talking about buying a car, and one thing led to another.
Well. Yeah, that's right. He's kind of big. He's 6'4", so yeah, it wasn't a good move. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I came close, but I escaped an automobile purchase. That was pretty good, even though I did come close on one automobile. But no, there's just one of these dermatology things, one of these little precancers. They cut off your face and you put stitches in a bandage. So it's, you'll trust me, you're pretty fair-skinned. You're going to have to be dealing with this when you get to my age.
Hey, well, I'm glad you're taking care of it and seeing the dermatologist. That's important as you get older. Make sure you're keeping up with your health.
That's right. Well, you're not going to be exempt from it, so just be careful.
Hey, I know the day will come. But I know our listeners are wondering, the topic of today's show is how a new President Trump will end up affecting their portfolio. So, Dave, how is it going to affect them so far, do you think?
Yeah, and it's going to affect in ways that we don't see yet. Whether the markets go up or go down, whether taxes go up or go down, that affects certain strategies. But the real issue, as I started the show with, is how should it affect people's decisions? And the reality is, for the most part, it shouldn't. Our listeners, you probably hear all the time, hey, you shouldn't check your statements every day, and maybe you shouldn't even look at your statements every month. You should just glance at them and move on, because you look at them too frequently and you're tempted to micromanage things. You're tempted. It's like that person sitting next to you on the highway or the freeway where they're zigzagging trying to get ahead of you, and you get to the toll booth, and where are they? Well, they're either right next to you or maybe even one car behind you, right? You don't get anywhere. So you can't look too closely. And the same is true when it comes to listen to the financial news and the rhetoric. Remember, the media is here to sell media. It's here to sell news. So everything in there is designed to escalate, to get people to think and question their sanity. So I'll listen to all the news, Sarah, just to kind of stay informed. And frankly, I look at it as being entertainment. Right. But if you take it seriously and you're thinking about making financial changes based upon that, most of the time it doesn't make sense. And that's what we're going to cover on today's show.
And if you have a retirement income question, you can always send it to us right here on the show. All you have to do is call our Ask Dave hotline at 800-822-1111 and leave us a voicemail with your name, number, email address, and your Ask Dave question. And if we use your question on the show, we might send you a free copy of Dave's book, Retirement Income Source. Now let's get to our Ask Dave question. This comes from George in Connecticut. He says, I feel pretty positively about President Trump and a Republican administration because usually, historically, Republicans are good for the markets.
We have a conservative in a blue state. Check that out. That doesn't happen too often. I know. I spent a good part of my life in Connecticut, right? I spent probably 4 months a year up there, and I grew up there. So George, yeah, that's usually the historical banter, but be careful not to make any changes because of that. Remember, that's old news. That's a long time ago. And remember that we had a really good stock market during 8 years of the Clinton administration in the back half of the 1990s. We had a challenging stock market during George W. Bush administration in the early 2000s. We had a great stock market during the Obama administration. So am I saying, and we also had a great stock market recently with 4 years of Joe Biden. So you might be, are you thinking, well, gee, Dave's trying to tell me Democratic administrations are better for the stock market and the economy. Well, no, I'm not saying that either. But George, what I am saying is that I think what affects the markets now has become bigger than who's in the White House and what party they're in. So I would be really careful with that. In fact, as far as the economy is concerned, the economy has been on a nice tear right now, right since the pandemic, and has been doing really well. And frankly, if the Fed's been working hard to raise rates to kind of stave off inflation. Now they've lowered rates a little, but now they're going to stop. Is that really going to be great for a growth economy? Maybe not. So there's headwinds, right? Stock market, same thing. Stock market's done well, but it's done well on anticipation of a Trump administration. So how much more does it have in it? With interest rates, long-term interest rates still being pretty high, the cost of borrowing being high. Again, I'm not negative about it. I'm just saying that you have to be careful. There's more. I think the decision on the economy and the markets now is much bigger than just who's sitting in the White House.
And George, thank you so much for calling us and putting in your Ask Dave question. If any of our listeners want to submit your Ask Dave question to the show and potentially win a free copy of Dave's new book, all you have to do is call our hotline at 800-822-1111. Leave us a voicemail. You're listening to The Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you may be wondering, hey, President Trump is now the president. We've passed his inauguration. How will this really affect my portfolios, and should it affect the way that I'm making decisions? And Dave, you're saying really it shouldn't. Who the president is doesn't have as much say in the way and what's going on in the markets. So, it's not the time right now maybe to make these decisions. Make sudden
the
decisions.
decision should be made based upon your personal goals, your current situation, your personal goals, and where you are in life. Now, because this show, of course, is called The Retirement Income Source, most of you are either retired or, let's say, in that red zone within 10 years of retirement. And decisions on your overall asset allocation during that time frame should really be made upon your goals, with the general idea that up until 10 years or so into retirement, or up until 10 years or so before retirement, I should say, you want total return irrespective of whether it comes from growth or income, right? Remember the equation. TR equals I plus G. Total return equals income plus growth. Income is the interest and dividend that gets paid out to you on a regular basis that you can either take and spend, or take and gift, or just reinvest to buy more shares. That's income, the interest and dividends, like rental income, right? And the growth is when you buy something at a certain price and it goes up in value. Up until that red zone, you don't care about whether your return comes from the I or the G, the income or the growth. You just want to make money on your money. But now as you start to get within that 10-year red zone, you slowly want to go to an income first, growth second mindset. And it's not a light switch. You don't flip the switch. As Sarah, as you know, you just more like a rheostat. It gradually turns until you're maybe 2 or 3 years out of retirement, where you're full on in an income first, growth second mindset. So that's got to be the major driver that affects your decision as to your asset allocation and so on. If you're making decisions based upon the president, you're making decisions about short-term market cycles or what you're reading in the news about the new administration, then I think that in general that's a big mistake. And coming up, we're going to talk more about this, including taxes, right? The threat of taxes being higher or lower and how that affects your investment decisions. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we've been talking about when it is the right time to make shifts in your portfolio and the way that you're investing. When a new president is inaugurated, maybe not the right time to make sudden drastic changes. And Dave, we've been talking about as you get near retirement, about 10 years out for retirement, that's the time that you do need to change your mindset from a total return focus to income generation. But can you explain why people have to make this transitional shift in their philosophy and in the way that they're investing?
Yeah, I mean, simply put, your money for most, your retirement funds for most of your life during what we call your accumulation years, when you're just putting money into 401ks and IRAs and you're building, is there to grow an asset base, which down the road could generate income. You don't need income from it right now. In fact, your income that you're earning from work is enough to cover all your bills and to save, right? So again, you want a total return. You want to make money on your money. You don't care if it comes from the I or the G. You don't care if it comes from interest and dividends or growth. So think about real estate, right? Real estate, you could buy speculative property or flip properties, in which the only way you make money is if you sell it at a higher price than you buy it.
Hoping to get growth on it, your investment.
That's right. But if you buy rental property, now there's two ways you can make money. One is through the rental income, which you can either take and use and spend or reinvest to buy more properties. And then the second way is growth. So earlier on, when you're younger, if you want to build your net worth, you don't care, you flip properties, you buy speculative property, it's fine. But as you get close to retirement, most people won't do that. They're going to buy rental property if they're going to buy anything. And that's the same thing true when you get in that red zone, that 10 years before retirement, where all of a sudden it does matter. And all of a sudden you switch to an income first, growth second mindset. Now, how do you do that, right? Do you do that with high dividend stocks, or do you do that with bonds and bond-like instruments? Well, you can say that has something to do with the president and how optimistic or pessimistic you are about the financial markets. But really, it's got to do with your own risk tolerance level, because if you try to predict what's going to happen, you could be wrong, right? If you use George's motto, our last caller, where he says, oh, well, markets do better in a Republican administration, you would have bet wrong for the last 5 or 6 administrations, right? So the focus on income first, growth second needs to be relative to your personal goals, proximity to retirement, and whether you do that through more bonds and bond-like instruments or through high dividend stocks has to do with your personal risk tolerance level, the stomach you have to see your portfolio drop.
And if you have questions about how you can determine your risk tolerance or other retirement-related questions, please reach out to us on the show. You can call our Ask Dave hotline at 800-822-1111. Leave us a voicemail with your name, number, phone number, email address, and your question. And if we use your question on a future show, we'll make sure to send you a free copy of Dave's new book, Retirement Income Source, the ultimate guide to eternal income. And let's get into our next Ask Dave question. This comes from Clarence in Delaware. Clarence says, I think President Trump will lower taxes, which should be better for the economy, and it will really give people the ability to use different tax strategies.
All right, Clarence. Well, I don't know if you were able to hear, I know you wrote and submitted this question before George's question last segment, but if you're here for that, will the tax reduction in taxes help the economy? Well, keep in mind that we're not even really betting on a reduction in taxes here, right? The Trump tax break from his when he was the 45th president, right, is set to expire. So those tax rates are scheduled to go back up. The starting rate at 12% is scheduled to go back up to 15. The top rate at 37 is scheduled to go back to 39.6, and everything in the middle. So the question is, are tax rates, and by the way, nobody really thought that was going to happen. Everybody thought that in administration, unless we had a completely blue Senate, blue House, and blue White House, that they wouldn't let them totally reset and go back to those high numbers. So the question is, are they going to go down further, or are they just going to extend or maybe make permanent the previous Trump tax cuts? And I think most people are in the camp that they might extend them, they might make them permanent. If they lower rates, maybe they lower them a little, but not a lot. So again, this concept about being good for the economy, as I said to George, I think is already priced into the markets. I don't think that's such a big deal. Now, how about tax planning? Well, again, if you didn't, let's say you want to do a Roth conversion because you're in the 12% bracket or the next bracket up to 22% bracket. Well, if you didn't do it in the last administration, then if those rates stay the same, I don't know that that's going to help you or give you any better opportunities in this administration. In fact, I don't think it will. So again, I don't think there's a lot of tax planning that's opened up. The same tax planning that was available for the last 4 years might be available for another 4 years, but I think that's the only assumption we could make. Now, if you want to assume that the SALT limits for your ability to deduct state and local income taxes goes up, okay, well then maybe that's something you can do. For one, I did that. I deferred last year's property tax to this year so I could pay 2 sets. So hopefully I can get a big reduction this year because I was limited to $10,000 as you were. And so that might be small things like that might be in the making, but that's really about it. Other than that, Clarence, I wouldn't make any major decisions based upon any hopes of a miraculously lower tax bracket environment.
And Clarence, thank you so much for calling our Ask Dave hotline and leaving us your voicemail. If any of our listeners have a retirement question that you would like to submit to the show, all you have to do is call 800-822-1111 and leave us a voicemail with your question for Ask Dave. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we've been talking about your portfolio and when it's time to make some changes. One of the big times when it's time to make changes is as you're approaching retirement, when you're 10 years out from retirement. We've talked a little bit about making that shift from total return focus to focusing on income generation. We've talked about why you really need to make that shift. But Dave, what are some other tips maybe when it comes to managing their taxes effectively that people, pre-retirees, need to know?
Well, when we talked about, I said recently, like the property tax thing, that's a real thing. We here in Florida, as you're aware, our property taxes are really due in November. And if we pay them in December, they're 1% higher. We pay them in January, they're 1% higher, all the way to March. So, especially knowing that Trump was going to the White House and knowing that I was limited in my deduction, I pushed my taxes back to pay them in January, and then next year I could pay them in November, so that if I get lucky and Congress increases the SALT limits, maybe I can get a higher deduction this year. If they don't, and it's not effective 2025, but might be effective 2026, well then no harm, no foul. I might postpone next November's to January and pay 2 next year. So again, little things like that don't have a chance of hurting you. And if it hurts me, it only hurts me because I pay 1% higher property tax, right?
Yeah, it's almost like an interest payment, right? You're kind of
exactly.
betting here.
That's what it is. But
Yeah.
so it has a chance to help me, but it can't hurt me.
Yeah.
But when you're out there just trying to time the markets and the economy based upon administration, that's a whole different can of worms, and that's where you could be wrong. And if you're wrong, it hurts.
We're going to continue the discussion about a President Trump administration and really the good, the bad, and the ugly and what it can mean for your portfolio. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and I'm sure that you've heard by now that we have a new president in the office, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of different spin and different interviews with the media, everyone talking about what this means for the markets, what it means for the economy and your portfolio. But luckily, there's no spin here with Dave and myself as we talk about what it really means for you and when you actually need to make decisions and change the way that you're investing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because, as you know, Sarah, one of the things that I'm known for in the financial world amongst advisors was when I predicted the bursting of the tech bubble.
Right. That was your first big claim to fame, was you saw the writing on the wall before 2001.
And I was early. I actually saw, it started around March of 2000, and I was worried at the end of 98. So maybe I was a little too early on the call, but, we ended up with almost a 50% drop in the markets, NASDAQ almost 80, right? So that was the first. And the second one was with the financial crisis, where it was about October of 2007. I said, we're likely to have a second drop in the market that might be bigger than the first. But I'll tell you, those market predictions are getting tougher and tougher now, just with artificial intelligence, with how rapid information is available, who has access to information. But long before that, again, the presidential twist on the predictions has become more difficult. I thought for sure that before the Clinton administration, going back to the election in 1992, that, hey, the late 90s were going to be really tough. And the late 90s were a really, really good time. And the early 2000s, I thought, would be better in the economy than they were, although I understood there was going to be a stock market bubble bursting. But even the economy wasn't that great in the early 2000s, right? And then the Obama administration, I thought, oh boy. But we came out of the financial crisis with a roar, and at least for his second term, we did really well. So, and it's getting harder and harder to predict, and that's why the most important thing is not to be that person that's on the highway, that's switching lanes, right to left to middle to left to right, back and forth like a madman, right? And you get to the toll booth, and they're either right next to you or they're right behind you. The important thing is to make the decisions based upon the longer picture, And that has to do with your goals and your risk tolerance.
Right. And the moral of the story is no one has a crystal ball. And when you think things might zig, they might in fact zag. So base it off of yourself and your goals. Let's get into our Ask Dave question. And I want all of our listeners to know that if you have a retirement question you would like to submit to our show, all you have to do is leave us a voicemail on the Ask Dave hotline. It's 800-822-1111. Leave your name, number, and a brief message with your question. And we may send you a copy of Dave's new book if we use your question on the show. We have a question here from Armando, based in Florida. Armando says, we really need to be concerned about President Trump's tariffs threats. I'm worried they will drive inflation up.
Armando, great question. I've heard this a lot, this point being made in the news. So I want to answer you in several different ways. First is, let's go back to the beginning of the show, right? Be careful. Like you say, don't look at your statement. Your account balance is online every day or every week. Even if you get them in the mail once a month, don't even necessarily look once a month. Glance at it and move on. Because if you're making decisions based upon those micro moves, you're like that guy on the highway that's switching lanes, but really not getting anywhere. The second thing is, remember, tariffs aren't all bad. They're good for U.S. jobs, which is good for the economy. A small increase in prices, and I'm going to guess maybe a 10% tariff, is actually good, because most of the time, the supplier, the foreign company that is being assessed these tariffs will just eat it because it's small. In which case now we're getting extra government revenue and we're not having any inflationary pressure. Tariffs above that can cause inflation, right? So 25% tariffs, well, that could be an issue. But even then, remember, trade balance is important. If we're importing more than we're exporting by a good margin, and a lot of our money's going out of the country, that's not good either. It's not good for jobs. It's not good for the strength of the currency or anything. So we have to keep the trade balance. So there might be some extreme situations where a 20 or 25% tariff is warranted. Not necessarily all bad, but smaller tariffs like 10%, usually are the theory is that they're actually absorbed by the other country, by their company, and as a result, really has zero negative effect. Now, also keep in mind that President Trump has a pretty good ego, right? He's there to leave a legacy, and his legacy isn't to create high inflation and to have an economy that's terrible. That's the last thing he wants. He hangs his hat and his reputation on being the president who could drive a good economy. So he may have shrugged his shoulders a week or two ago when somebody said, well, how about the stock market? How's it going to affect the market? He shrugged his shoulders as if he didn't care, but you better believe he cares. It's his legacy. So is this just a bargaining tool? Well, yeah, I think personally a lot of these tariff threats are bargaining tools to protect U.S. interests. So Armando, again, I wouldn't worry too much about that, but great question. And you know what? Lay off the news. If you watch the news, watch it for entertainment, listen to it for entertainment like I do, but take it with a grain of salt.
And Armando, thank you so much for calling our Ask Dave hotline and leaving your question for the show. I want to encourage all of our listeners to call us at 800-822-1111 and leave us your name, your phone number, and your voicemail with your question. And we may send you a free copy of Dave's book, Retirement Income Source, the ultimate guide to eternal income, if we use your question on the show. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we've been talking about what a President Trump means for the economy, whether you should make some decisions right now based off your portfolios, whether it's time to change up your tax plan based off what the Republican administration may or may not do. And the answer to all of those questions, Dave, is no. It's not a great time to do those things, right? It's much better to base your plan off of your goal setting and for your own personalized needs versus what's going on in the media and what you see in the news.
Sure. And, you know, I'm not even that optimistic the market's going to do that great. The economy is going to do that great. Again, we have a great economy for a while. The Fed's kind of said they're signaled they're going to slow down or stop the rising of interest rates because with all the growth promises of the new presidency, you know, the long-term interest rates actually came back up a bit. That's not good for borrowing costs. So, you know, that could be a headwind. The markets, I heard a statistic recently that we're going into a new presidency with one of the highest PE ratios and other financial ratios we've seen in a long, long time.
So what does that mean for our average listeners? That
means that, you know, you may think the market's going to go up because of a Trump administration, but the reality of it is it's already pretty high. Most people would say the stock market's frothy. I mean, you know, our own Eric Byrich, one of our CIOs, our CIO in charge of stocks, he even says that the market is somewhat overvalued at this point. And usually the bond guys are saying the stock market's overvalued. When you have the stock guys saying the stock market's overvalued, you have to sit up and pay attention. Does that mean it's going to go down? Well, no, because the market likes Trump overall. But does it mean that we're going to see 3 more years or 4 more years of a market like 2024? Probably not.
Yeah. Do you think President Trump, he's made promises that he's going to bring inflation down. Do you think he's going to be able to achieve that?
It's going to be harder and harder because he wants to get the economy going. He wants to keep it going. And how's that done? That's done with federal spending. That's done, the kind of the free way of doing it is less business regulation to let business do its thing. So I'll put a check mark in the pro side of a Trump administration, less regulation, let corporate America do it. But tariffs can have a little bit of a headwind component, sure. And the national debt is getting out of control. So, and there's only so much Doge can do, right? Elon Musk and Doge, there's only so much they can do at this point. But you have the interest payment on our national debt becoming a higher and higher and higher percentage of the government's outflows. And that has to stop. So unless he can get the Federal Reserve to start more quantitative easing to artificially drive down long-term rates so government debt could be refinanced at a lower interest rate, he has a headwind.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. And if you would like to call and leave us a voicemail with your Ask Dave question, we would love to hear from you. Give us a call at 800-822-1111.
And most important, we hope that you're here with us next week. Same time, same station. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and you've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where, yes, it's all about the income.